Hello, everyone. So we're going to kick off today's session talking about tech for good. And we've got three very different stakeholders in tech for good. And I'd like for them to start off by, number one, explaining who they are, though many of you already know who they are, and what tech for good actually means from their specific corner of the world. So I'm going to start with Bernhard. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here. My name is Bernhard Kowatsch. I'm the head of the UN World Food Programme's Global Innovation Accelerator. Now, tech for good is something for me that's, I think, a necessity, but also a big opportunity for the future to actually be better, right? A lot of times we're talking about like the opportunities that are in tech, about startups, innovations that can help us, like solve big problems. So why couldn't those big problems be problems that vulnerable people, poor people, hungry people are facing? And this is where I think for me tech for good really comes in, and like our accelerator, the World Food Programme Innovation Accelerator, does exactly that. So we're supporting startups and nonprofit innovations that can help us end hunger or make emergency response more effective and more efficient. And this is where I think for me at least tech for good has this opportunity where oftentimes we're talking about the promise of tech, the future of tech, what's the future going to hold? And I like to believe that we should have more positive futures rather than negative futures.
Fantastic. And would you mind just saying a few words about Ute, because she's on her way but will not be here until a little bit later.
Oh yeah, sorry for that. So actually, and it's, unless she's stuck in a traffic jam. So actually the Deputy Executive Director, so the number 2 of the World Food Programme, is going to join us for this panel. She's going to tell us a little more about like what's actually happening in the world and what are the trends, what is coming towards us like this year but also the next year, and why is there now a sense of urgency to act right now and not like in a year or 2 years from now.
And then I've got Nick Steptoe here, who's the CEO of Oliver Wyman. We got all the bigwigs and the VIPs today. Oliver Wyman is all over. You're a global firm. You work with some of the biggest corporations around the world, organizations around the world. What does tech for good mean from Oliver Wyman's standpoint?
I mean, I'm basically an optimist, so I think tech is quite often for good. But a lot of wrong things can happen along the path, as we know. And so for me, I think tech for good means 2 different things. It means the core mission of changing how the world works. And it doesn't always work great, which I think is both a bold mission, many mission-led organizations here at Davos and not here, sincerely committed to just improving the state of ... whatever it is that fills in this gap. But then tech for good, and I think particularly something we're going to be talking about today, is also taking those capabilities which are developed and saying what are, beyond that core mission, specific applications that this new technology can really improve. And not many people, I think, would have started off by saying blockchain was an application which we should use to try and alleviate global hunger. But you know what? It can.
And we're going to definitely talk more about that in a minute. Thanks for that leading indication. I've got Alan here. And Alan, you're a partner at a most venerable law firm. And people usually come to you when they're in DC, either in trouble and need help, or they need advice because they're starting a business that where there's a lot of potentially legal hurdles. So what does tech for good mean to you?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I come at it from kind of 2 perspectives. As Sandra said, I'm an attorney, been practicing in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space since 2015, got introduced to cryptocurrency and government before that, and I think it's really important for attorneys who work in this space to help enable builders to build technology. I take a little bit different view. Technology, I think, is just technology. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. Most people in the world want to use it for good. Most people also want to understand what the boundaries are, the expectations, and government has an interest in various public policy goals that go beyond just what you hear from the regulators. Issues of security, privacy, prosperity. these are core things that government wants for society and from society. Technology has an important place in that, and people building technology and experimenting with technology are the ones who are going to make that happen. Now, I'm also a former government person, and so I believe very strongly that government needs to be able to adopt technology to drive towards those public policy goals. And government has struggled to do that since we moved from the era of technology being developed by the military or in the national labs with years to figure out how to regulate its commercial use, to now kind of playing catch up to the development of technology and figuring out how it fits. So I think it's very important that tech for good includes making sure government has access, government understands, government uses the technology and isn't fearful of the development of technology and the use of new technology.
So there may be those in the room that get it and say, okay, I get it, tech can be used for good and this is all fine and well. But what is it in real practice? And so I'd love for Bernhard to actually talk about some of the instances of usage of blockchain in particular, just because we are here for that topic. But you can go beyond that, of course. There's lots of other tech in the Accelerator. And then we're also going to talk about food for crisis, which is near and dear to GBBC's heart. And we're going to be giving an update today on that. So Bernhard, over to you on what you guys have done.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's plenty of examples in that, and like, of course, like a lot of times people will just go directly to like just crypto, right? Like, how can we use crypto? No, it's like there's a broader application of blockchain and Web3 that we can talk about. One of the startups we support, for instance, is a Jordanian startup called Decapitalist that do farm-to-fork digitization on blockchain. And we supported them because they're increasing the smallholder farmers' income. So, you know, you may see this in the US or in Western Europe, oftentimes where it's about like food quality for the end consumer, but you can actually use, and like, so they actually, just last year, they sold 45% of the shares to Del Monte, like a large multinational company. Now, you might say, are they successful enough? Maybe not yet. Maybe there's still more that needs to happen, but it's some inspiration. Another example I want to mention is like something we actually developed internally inside the World Food Program, which is called building blocks. And it started with the idea, how can we make cash transfers more transparent, more accountable, efficient, but also better for collaboration between different aid organizations. Started with a basic idea, like a refugee goes into a store, purchases food, they can pay with the iris scan, and like now actually that iris scan authenticates a blockchain transaction, which is on a private Ethereum wallet. Now this is what we've been building like back in 2017. This solution is now used by 4 million people already that can go shopping with that solution, essentially. So Syrian refugees in Jordan, Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, just in those two countries, we've transferred over $500 million of cash to people using that system. And the advantage of that is like, it's no longer the WFP system, it's not the UNHCR system, the whatever system, it's the neutral blockchain network. And we used that system again in Ukraine right now, actually, where we're using it for over 30 international NGO and the UN organizations to essentially provide the accountability to deduplicate transactions, so to make sure that it's not the same family that gets essentially support from two different organizations without knowing of each other. In between March and August last year, we've authenticated more than $350 million, and we're identifying $35 million of potentially duplicate transactions. And that essentially didn't go to duplicate transactions, but went to actually provide food to another 180,000 people. Now, and this is where I think you talk about the power of technology, the power of blockchain, where the real life application there is like 180,000 people had something to eat because of blockchain technology.
Can't get more clearer than that, people. Okay, so I want to now introduce the topic of food for crisis, because at the GBBC, as much as we like to convene folks to talk about various topics, we also realize that we've got to put things into action. So, Bernhard, going back to you a bit, can you talk a little about the genesis of what Food for Crisis, how it happened, and then obviously what is it? And then can we please put up the slide of our founding partners, which also explains why we've got Nick and Alan.
No, so I'm actually not 100%. Maybe it even started in Davos here last year, but then essentially the basic idea of Food for Crisis was, what is the root cause? What can blockchain technology help us to get to the next level? Knowing that right now we're, the situation of food security in the world and hunger is getting actually worse. It's getting worse right now. Now, Ute is going to talk about it in a bit. Like, I'm not going to preempt all of what she's going to say, but like, but the basic idea behind this is saying like, okay, what can we do? How can we inspire people to actually donate more money or invest into like solutions that sustainably end hunger? And specifically talking about like the blockchain, crypto space. But there's lots of skepticism. Like, you may not believe that the money you're donating is actually ending up where it's intended to. You may say, well, I would like to have more transparency. I would like to have more say in what's happening with the money. And this is where Food for Crisis came from. And then
We literally said to ourselves, the food crisis is getting worse. What can we do? What's actually achievable? And who do we need? We literally started from there. And then ideas started percolating. So then entree Nick and Alan. And here, actually above us, is a slide with our founding supporters. And I want to thank them for collaborating with us. But I'm going to go over to Nick about how he got roped in and the organization got roped into supporting. No, absolutely. Oliver Wyman has been absolutely unbelievable helping us getting this set up from a global perspective.
Thanks very much, Sandra. I mean, I should take no credit myself whatsoever. Michael Wagner and Chaitra Chandrasekhar, my Oliver Wyman partners, have really been at the forefront of this, working with Bernhard to help just sort of shape out the program and trying to say, well, what are the goals here? I'm not sure if I'm stealing your thunder by talking a little bit about that. The intention is exactly as Sandra said. How can blockchain help us feed the hungry? The sort of knowledge, control, and trust conundrum which Bernhard laid out, there are technologies here which can help us do that, which can help us with traceability and auditability. And the goal really is to raise $100 million target by, I think, 2024 in cash and in-kind donations to really develop the solution. A moonshot goal of $1 billion. And with half of that really going to serve immediate need and about half going into sort of longer term development, and sort of trying to make sure that it isn't simply the technology solution, but there is an ecosystem here, exactly of the type that the incubator is sort of developing, which can encourage solutions which are still nascent, either through hackathon or through sponsoring existing minimum viable products to get to scale. And really, crack on with solving the food crisis.
And Alan, from your standpoint, why was this even interesting to you?
Well, I mean, first, look, our entire community, what's being expected of our community is, don't tell us about technology, tell us about use cases. This is remarkable use of this technology with real human impact. However, as Bernhard said, there is skepticism of this technology, and unfortunately, when there are unforeseen events or there are events that disrupt our community, our ecosystem, that leads to a loss in trust, it leads to a loss of concern. And so when using these types of technologies, we need to make sure that, number one, governments understand them, number two, regulators are comfortable with them, and that number three, that they're being implemented in a way that is consistent with the government's expectations, its rules, its regulations, and where there aren't those things, that we can help use this as an example to help fill in those gaps. And so we're really proud to be able to bring together practitioners from within our firm in blockchain and cryptocurrency, and in corporate and nonprofit, anti-money laundering, economic sanctions, securities and commodities, all the things that come up in this world, all the concerns that can be raised. How can we help make sure that those are not impediments, first and foremost, but second, that we can really use this project as an example to show the real, positive, tangible human benefit of this technology.
And we already know from the work that the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator has done they've proved out a lot of these use cases, and it's growing in use and, frankly, user and support and help, which is the ultimate end goal. But where we have here with the Food for Crisis initiative is really twofold. One is the tracking and tracing piece, which is where the heck, if I'm a donor, my money is going. And actually, it's not just it goes to the World Food Program and then that's it. It's actually how far can we get in that traceability and have real accountability for where those monies go? And does it really, from a data analytical standpoint, how much of it actually impacted someone at that food level, and how much of it actually went to admin, how much of it went to logistics? And I think these are things that's possible. The question is now, how do we get there to prove those things out? On the flip side of it, the data piece, I'd love, Bernhard, if you can talk about hunger data. We don't talk about this enough. Hunger data, what can we do with this?
No, I think this is one of the big challenges also, like, and I know some of you in the audience, like, if you're not really spending a lot of time reading about this, you may not even be exposed to some of the realities, right? Like, where it's like, okay, everybody by now, of course, knows there's war going on in Ukraine, and, you know, like, there's lots of people suffering from that. But what are the other countries that are actually suffering from hunger, or which countries are worse off, right? I mean, some of you, again, would say, well, you know, intuitively, probably Afghanistan must be somewhere up the list.
Yeah.
But what then? Yemen? Congo? Venezuela? I mean, like, this is where it's getting really interesting, and this is why we need to also, and I think that's the beauty of, like, a Web3 initiative about blockchain, where you can actually go away from, like, well, I'm telling you this, to I'm proving with data that this is happening. And right, there is actually data, there's real-time data that's powered by AI that we use at the World Food Program already, where you can look at this, like, it's called Hunger Map Live, hungermap.wfp.org. You can zoom into any country on the planet and look into in which region is hunger, like, higher or lower. And this is something where, so rather than saying as I have an opinion about what should be done, we can actually have a fact-based conversation about facts, right? And this is something where bringing this together, like the data piece of, like, actually understanding this with technology, and then maybe even, like, marketing and, like, you know, a movement. I mean, you know, some people may say, well, movement is maybe too big of a name, but, like, you know, getting more people excited about this, where not making you feel bad. It's like, because it's more about, like, the, you know, the moonshot goal, and you know, Nick was talking about this, where it's like, you know, maybe $1 billion. I mean, and I you know, we were looking at each other. It's like, you know, what could be actually really worthwhile doing? You know, we all have our own projects, our startups, our companies. What should we try doing? Like, and with GBBC and, like, with the network, with the community, you know, I think it could be possible to actually raise $1 billion.
I mean, I just to that point, I found the hunger map absolutely fascinating, and I think that one of the stats on there, which I sort of, I suppose somewhere intuitively may have understood, but didn't really know, was that the average length of a crisis like this is 9 to 10 years, and it's in the news cycle for, well, a small portion of that. Mm-hmm. And when you look at both climate hotspots or natural catastrophe hotspots, refugee hotspots, I don't know, my mind didn't immediately go to the hunger crisis that surrounds that. So whether it's on this project, Ukraine obviously, but Venezuelan refugees in Peru, whether it's what's happening in North Kenya, whether it's the Philippines with its sort of nat catastrophe sort of propensity. Yep. There's a lot of great data on there. I encourage you to have a look and ponder what that means for us all.
We'll provide the link for the hunger data map. I will also have to say, World Food Program probably holds a huge amount of data that the public doesn't know about and the public could utilize. And I think that's one of the pieces of the innovation part. It's not about all of us being able to go to Yemen or Somalia and actually give bags of food. That's not what we're talking about here, because the World Food Program does their best to do that in war-torn areas in crisis. It is about how do we as technologists or business people, whatever our expertise is, how can we actually do a piece related around the data analysis, maybe innovation, building an app, whatever it might be, but unlocking that sort of global people power. And we start with the GBBC network, but frankly, I hope it extends well beyond that. And so, yes, there are some names that you recognize, some startups maybe you don't recognize on here. We have a pipeline of folks who've already signed up to support. everyone's going to be doing something different. And Oliver Wyman is doing something very different than a Steptoe is doing than a Bayer, or one of the startups that we've got, Z-Blocks. So I encourage you, if you are interested in either the tracking and tracing of the money piece, because that's increasingly where also funding is going, right? It's not about giving food necessarily, it's actually now potentially giving cards with debit cards or some sort of enabled digital cash for people to spend locally. That trend itself is going to enable some very interesting things. And then further to that, the analysis around the data mining and data analytics on hunger that frankly hasn't gotten enough attention. And maybe we can encourage other NGOs to unlock their data troves and work together. How do you guys feel about that? I think...
No, I mean, like, look, this is also where I think for everybody who's here in the room, like, even if, I don't know, you're a startup or you yourself, like, you say, well, I'm not sure, but, like, I like the idea. I mean, like, there's so much, and I think if there's so much any of us can do, and, like, if it's, like, posting on social media, if it's, like, talking to friends, like, that's, like, it starts about, like, with small actions, but, like, you can actually do this, and, like, I am also challenging myself as well as colleagues at the World Food Program regularly about, like, what can we actually do to, you know, the North Star has to be how can we help people better or more, right? And if that's the North Star, I mean, it's fairly simple to prioritize also in terms of like, okay, if it means like we open source the data, let's open source the data. Now, I'm not I'm not in fairy tale land, so I understand there's challenges, of course, right? Like it's a little bit like same with like blockchain. It's like you need to know what you're doing and you need to think about the negative consequences, about the risks,
Right.
of course. However, I think this is where like there can be lots of opportunities that we're talking about. If we are really pushing hard, and if we're pushing hard, we can get there.
And of course, I mean, as we were acknowledging through that, different countries have different views, number one, on the handling and use of data. And of course, when you combine that with things like blockchain-based governance, blockchain-based tracking and tracing, digital currencies, it becomes, you know, a complicated, it can become a complicated combination of things. And that's where also advocacy is going to be important. Navigating through those waters, having champions with national governments who have different views on whether it's the use of data or the provision of aid in certain countries or things of that nature. But we want to make sure that that is not an impediment to what we're trying to accomplish here with the technology.
And Nick, from your standpoint, you have so many different types of clients. And you've also helped us to unlock some folks who are actually interested in supporting this initiative. In your view, from a corporate standpoint, why do corporates do this? Why would a corporate want to get involved in something like this? Because at the end of the day, if they take their people or hard dollars and support this, it's not like it necessarily will hit their bottom line in any significant way.
Yeah, I mean, there's the ghastly old term of corporate social responsibility, which I think only began to scratch the surface, really, of why companies engage. Oliver Wyman's a consulting firm, a part of the Marshall McLennan Group. We had a session this morning on Generation Z. So now 21% of the workforce. That spotlight alone was just a reminder, because I view some of this generational segregation as largely the stuff that management consultants like to do. In reality, there's more of a spectrum here. But I think we are after purpose. All of us are after purpose. We're after belonging. We're after a certain amount of sort of delegated authority and the ability to sort of be entrepreneurial and get on and do our thing. And certainly for Oliver Wyman, I mean, the one modest role I did have was when Michael and Chaitra said we'd love to get involved in this. We have a little framework to work out where we do commit our resources. We try and commit a certain percentage of our capacity every year to social impact.
And we are very grateful for that.
Well, no, I mean, we're grateful to you for convening it, Sandra. I mean, but it was a no-brainer, honestly, because it fulfills for us all of those commitments. It's an opportunity to help the World Food Programme make a breakthrough, achieve amazing things, which is Oliver Wyman's purpose. And, you know, our people love it. We love the results.
Fantastic. Well, we have our special guest here. Have we given you at least a moment to catch your breath? We'd love to, Ute, thank you for coming and joining us as our special guest. You have the next few minutes. The floor is yours. Please.
Thank you. And I was walking up, not using the lift, so excuse me that I'm a little bit of,
Thank you for coming.
But I thought let me walk up and really try to accompany and also support what I guess Bernhard was already saying. Because as a World Food Program, we are, really stressed these days, and you know that the global food security crisis is hitting everyone. I hope you had time to read or look at the WEF risk report. I think it's one of the most excellent reports I read from WEF, compliments. But if you look at one of the graphs, there is a risk, a risk bubble. And that graph, I love that graph because it's, you see immediately that the cost of living, energy, and food supply, these are the three, really high-ranked crisis elements people are just, in a way, perceiving. So, for us as the World Food Program, I just want to remind everyone in the room and listening that we gave us a promise. There is a SDG 2 out there saying we want to achieve a world without hunger. And we have 7 years to go, colleagues, 7 years to go. And I want to share with you some of the global figures. We are so far away than ever before. It's like a reverse trend over the last 3 to 5 years, and that is alarming. And I would say, as we speak, it's unacceptable that 50 million people are definitely at the brink of starvation, at famine, in our category catastrophe. These are people in countries like Afghanistan, Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia. And there are 350 million people acute hungry, and there are, I would say 850 up to 1 billion people, suffering from, they are chronically hungry. So they don't have enough to eat. So, and this is the next generation, and the World Bank studies and the research is saying, these are lost generations, because if you're not investing in human capital, if you're not investing in the next generation, then we will pay all the kind of indirect or direct macroeconomic costs. And the worrying part for the World Food Program is that the people in need, the numbers are just going up and up and up. Our operational costs had been 1 billion higher last year than the year before. 1 billion. So if we are super successful in doing the fundraising, I need 1 billion more to get to the same number of target group. So coming to the topic here, this is why it's so important for us that we get all hands on deck. We need every help to reduce our operational costs, to join with us the advocacy for what we want to do and what we want to achieve. So this kind of initiative, Food for Crisis, I have to say is ideal. Thank you for taking the initiative, trusting us, trusting also the Innovation Accelerator, because we need your help. And what we can say is that you would not in a way imagine that a blockchain technology is working in Syria, or is that to be considered, doing our truck fleet management. And I can tell you, we are saving so much of our operational costs, and that is so important. So it's not just to get more funds, it's reducing operational costs, it's reducing through technology, duplication. All these kind of intelligent systems are helping us so much, and it's also a kind of, let me say, a platform in terms of attracting new ways of thinking how we have to, in a way, design our humanitarian response. And definitely, if you read some of the reports, State of the Humanitarian System report, for example, just issued 2 weeks ago, it's laying out a red carpet for the World Food Program, saying you are system relevant, And you have to lead as a UN organization the discussion how the humanitarian 2.0 response looks like. There is no ways that we can operate without you and your kind of intelligence and your kind of good innovative ideas. And I want to thank everyone who is really making that possible, that we can reduce our operational costs or simply be better to really reach out to more people, because every single person has a right to say, yes, I have enough food and I'm not hungry. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And absolutely. And I think Ute said it best, all hands on deck. There is something every single person in the room, every single person who sees this recording of our conversation here, you can do something. And I think if we all did a little bit, it would go a long way to really no hunger. By the way, I just saw, if you don't follow World Food Program, you should, to get their emails or their LinkedIn posts. They just put one out today on a concept called child wasting. I didn't even know that concept existed. 30 million children in 15 of the worst affected countries, wasting, that generation that you just talked about. I mean, could you talk to us a little bit about, like, what are these numbers? Are they all going up? Are any metrics getting better?
We have 3 indicators for the next generation. It's wasting, stunting, and obesity. These are the 3 indicators, as part of the SDG system. Unfortunately, every indicator is pointing in the wrong direction. And wasting is terrible. I traveled to Yemen last year, which is not easy because normally you can't go. So we have our own airline, United Airline Humanitarian Air Service. Needs also kind of innovation in terms of technology and efficiency. But I've just taken our own airline, and then we travel to Sana and Aden, and then you go to the hospitals, and you see kids in that kind of wasted situation, and it's very heartbreaking. And the president of IMF said something which was also very heartbreaking. She said to me, Ute, what we know is hunger is the most solvable problem. But the problem with wasting and stunting is, even if you invest in kids, they will never get to that stage where you can say, it's the same as a normal childhood in our upbringing in Canada, in Europe, or in the kind of whatever kind of developed countries. And that kind of, that kind of situation is really, I just read a banner, you have to change that the world, that the world is definitely in a better condition. I have to say, yes, when I started working for WFP, I was just thinking, oh my goodness, no, the billions and billions we need, wow, that's a lot of money. At the end of the day, it's not a lot of money. If I look into all your kind of business, the profits some of the countries are, and companies are making, if I'm just saying, what we need per year, 25 billion, that's not a lot compared to some of the stimulus packages governments are laying out right now, and. But the most interesting factor is, if you look at the WEF report again, the least developed countries and low middle income countries will suffer a lot from the inflation, from the cost of living, the energy prices. So that's the worrying part. And that's coming back to the question in investing in the next generation. You will see the number of kids wasted, kids stunted, and kids with obesity, that's malnutrition, poor, and that's the unfortunate factor. So from our perspective, all hands on deck. I'm just repeating that, and maybe back to you.
I think that'll be our quote for social media, all hands on deck. There's a question here. In our last few minutes, I'm going to take some questions, if that's okay for the panelists.
It's kind of ironic that we have this moonshot of $1 billion and that we say those words in Davos today, right? We just have to go about 1 mile that way from the promenade, and that billion is waiting there to be donated on the spot with one check, right? So it's kind of a bit weird that we say we want $100 million and the moonshot is $1 billion, and we have guys like Mark Benioff and everyone, billionaires here walking around, and yet I believe that it shouldn't be top down, but bottom up. I really believe as an industry, as fintech for good, right, that we just mentioned, it is of essence that we show that leadership rather than Mr. Musk or Mr. Benioff or Mr. whoever, Mr. Branson, or other billionaires to write down the check and put the $1 billion. Because we can make that difference as an industry. I really believe that. You know, we have all the technologies, the Web3 solutions to do that. So if I may, I think this is the moment to all say, we go. We do this. Let's have a hand of applause. Let's do it. Yes.
We got real time. Awesome. Well, look, I look forward to hopefully having many of you come to us afterwards. Please feel free to come to Bernhard. Bernhard, please.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again, both Sandra, to you for inspiring and taking Food for Christ forward. Nick, for Oliver, Wyman, and Ellen. I think in the supporters who are in the audience here also, A, we couldn't do this without you. B, you're driving it. So I just want to say thank you and. Let's get to the billion.
This big problem, this SDG 2, is actually solvable. Yes. I agree with you, Ute. It has to just be the will of the people, and I do believe in people power, and it needs to be ground up, that we can do this. And so, here are a few things. Number one, we are mobilizing universities around the world who have blockchain groups and centers of innovation, and we are getting them together. We want the youth involved. We want, obviously, individual donors involved, those who are in the technology space, but we also we need to have the activists and the humanitarians, the people who actually understand what's going on the ground. It's got to be a 360-degree feedback loop. And so this is why we are asking and saying everyone has a role to play. There will just be different roles to play, obviously, and we'll work that out. And think of us as sort of the clearinghouse for figuring out who's doing what, because thankfully, because of OW, we have actually organized an infrastructure that will set us up so that we can actually scale this thing.
And so contact Sandra if you want to fund. Yes?
Okay, sure.
Yes, for this audience here.
Yes,
don't
you
have to go
can
website,
come to
you just have-
GBBC, come to Bernhard, come to actually anyone else. We will make sure that it gets channeled through the right places.
Right, and from a personal perspective, I met Bernhard, who educated me on this topic in July. And I have to say, it's inspirational listening to you, because food inflation generally in the Western world is running at about 10% right now. So before we get to the critical map, food inflation at 10%. In the UK, there's an estimated 3 million children who have a nourishment problem. This is in the UK. Yeah. It's a G7 country.
Sorry, USA too.
We're moving it on to the US, exactly. Financial inclusion. My Norwegian friend, energy costs in Europe, unbelievable. I live in Oslo. My electricity bill in my average house is running close to $5,000 a month, which most people can. And we're subsidized, thankfully. And then we have an energy excess. It's because of the inefficiency of Nord Pool. Now, I am a capitalist, but if you are in Europe right now, for all of our American friends, capitalism isn't working, particularly because it's getting pretty difficult to provide energy and food for people before we even get to a lot of these crises. So I'm grateful for you to point it out. But thank you very much for this panel, and can we have a big round of applause? Get your checkbook, your Vimo, or your Apple Pay out and see.
Just to be clear, we believe in accountability. So at our UNGA in New York, we will be doing a check-in on how all of us are doing. And hopefully a year from now, we'll have another status update as to what we have achieved. So this is not about just talk. This is about let's get going and all hands on deck.